A luxury bus pulled into the station on a rainy afternoon, its polished exterior reflecting the grey clouds above. Among the passengers boarding was Margaret Whitmore, draped in designer clothes and carrying bags from the city's most expensive boutiques. She stepped onto the bus with the air of someone who believed the world should bend to her will. Behind her, an elderly man shuffled forward, his worn jacket telling stories of decades past, his weathered hands gripping a simple canvas bag. Margaret barely glanced at him as she claimed her seat in the front row, spreading her shopping bags across the adjacent space as if she owned it. The old man moved slowly down the aisle, his eyes scanning for an empty seat. When he approached the row where Margaret sat, she turned to him with a look of pure disdain. "You can't sit here," she said loudly, her voice dripping with contempt. "These seats are for people who actually matter." The entire bus fell silent. Passengers turned to watch, some shocked, others uncomfortable. But what happened next would change everything, because the quiet old man stood up with dignity, and when the driver turned around and recognized him, the truth about who this man really was would shake Margaret to her core and teach everyone on that bus a lesson about respect, dignity, and the danger of judging people by their appearance. What the driver knew about this seemingly ordinary elderly man would reveal a story so powerful that it would spread far beyond that rainy afternoon, touching hearts and changing minds about what it truly means to deserve respect. The bus engine hummed as more passengers settled into their seats, creating that familiar symphony of rustling bags, quiet conversations, and the occasional cough. Margaret Whitmore sat in her claimed territory like a queen on a throne, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her designer purse. The old man, whose name was Henry, stood in the aisle for a moment after her rejection, his kind eyes taking in the scene without judgment. If you're enjoying this story about dignity, respect, and the unexpected ways life teaches us lessons, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that touch the heart and open the mind. Your support helps us bring more meaningful content to people who believe in the power of human connection and the importance of treating everyone with kindness. Henry moved further back, finding an empty seat near the middle of the bus. As he sat down, a young mother with a toddler smiled at him warmly, a silent acknowledgement of the indignity he had just endured. Margaret, meanwhile, had already dismissed the entire interaction from her mind, pulling out her phone to scroll through social media, occasionally laughing at something on her screen, with a volume that seemed calculated to remind everyone of her presence. The bus driver, James, had watched the entire exchange through his rearview mirror. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. He recognized Henry immediately, though he said nothing yet. James had been driving this route for 15 years, and he had learned that sometimes the best lessons come not from immediate intervention, but from allowing situations to unfold naturally. The bus pulled out of the station, its wheels splashing through puddles as the rain continued its steady percussion on the roof. For the first 20 minutes, the journey proceeded normally. Margaret made 2 phone calls, each one louder than necessary, discussing her shopping spree and upcoming social events with friends who seemed to share her worldview. "The problem with public transportation," she announced to her phone companion, loud enough for half the bus to hear, "is that you have to share space with people who simply don't understand quality or class. I mean, did you see that old man who tried to sit next to me? His jacket probably cost less than my coffee this morning." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A teenage girl whispered something to her friend, both of them shaking their heads. An elderly woman across the aisle from Henry caught his eye and offered him a sympathetic smile. Henry simply looked out the window, watching the city pass by, his expression peaceful despite the humiliation he had experienced. His weathered face held stories that Margaret couldn't begin to imagine, experiences that had taught him that dignity comes from within, not from the validation of others. The bus made its first stop, and a few passengers got off. A businessman who had witnessed Margaret's behavior deliberately chose a seat far from her, preferring to stand near the back rather than sit in the empty space beside her shopping bags. As the journey continued, the weather worsened. Rain hammered against the windows and thunder rumbled in the distance. The bus swayed slightly as James navigated through increasingly heavy traffic. Then, about 40 minutes into the journey, something unexpected happened. A car ahead suddenly swerved, causing a chain reaction. James expertly maneuvered the bus to avoid a collision, but the sudden movement sent Margaret's shopping bags tumbling into the aisle, their expensive contents spilling across the floor. Designer shoes, silk scarves, and luxury cosmetics scattered everywhere. Margaret shrieked, immediately diving to gather her purchases. "Be careful!" she shouted at nearby passengers. "Those are expensive! Don't step on anything!" In her panic to retrieve her belongings, she didn't notice when one of her shopping bags slid further back in the bus, coming to rest near Henry's feet. Henry bent down slowly, his old joints protesting the movement, and carefully picked up the bag. Inside, he could see a delicate crystal figurine, somehow still intact despite the chaos. He stood and began making his way forward to return it to Margaret. But as he walked, the bus hit a pothole, and Henry stumbled. His canvas bag fell, and its contents spilled out. What emerged surprised everyone who saw it. Photographs, dozens of them, scattered across the floor. Not just any photographs, but images that told a powerful story. There were pictures of Henry in a military uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, photos of him shaking hands with presidents and dignitaries, images of him at ceremonies, receiving honors, speaking at podiums. One photograph showed him younger, standing with a group of soldiers, all of them smiling despite the hardship visible in their eyes. Another showed him at a hospital, surrounded by children, his smile warm and genuine. A businessman nearby picked up one of the photos, his eyes widening. "Is this you?" he asked Henry quietly. Henry nodded modestly, beginning to gather his photographs, but the businessman had already shown the image to the person next to him, and word began to spread through the bus like wildfire. James, the bus driver, had been waiting for the right moment. He pulled the bus over safely to the side of the road, put it in park, and stood up. The entire bus fell silent as he turned to face his passengers. "Folks," James said, his voice carrying authority and emotion, "I need to tell you something about the man some of you have been ignoring, and one of you has been actively disrespecting." He gestured toward Henry, who was still quietly picking up his photographs, his cheeks slightly flushed with embarrassment at the attention. "This is Henry Morrison," James continued, "and 25 years ago he saved my life. What do you think Margaret is feeling right now? Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on how people judge others by appearance." James stepped into the aisle, his eyes glistening with emotion. "I was 19 years old, serving in the military overseas," he began. "Our unit came under attack and I was injured, trapped under debris. I was certain I was going to die there. But this man," he pointed to Henry, "who was our commanding officer, ran through enemy fire 3 times to pull me and 2 other soldiers to safety. He took shrapnel to his leg doing it, shrapnel that still causes him pain to this day." The bus was absolutely silent now. Even Margaret had stopped gathering her belongings, frozen in place, her face pale. "Henry Morrison received the Silver Star for his bravery that day," James continued, "but that's not the only reason he's a hero. After he retired from the military, he didn't rest. He spent 20 years working with homeless veterans, helping them find housing, jobs, and medical care. He used his own pension to start a non-profit that has housed over 300 veterans and their families." A woman in the back began to cry softly. The teenage girls who had whispered earlier were staring at Henry with newfound respect and shame at their earlier judgment. "He volunteers at children's hospitals," James went on. "He tutors underprivileged kids for free. He's been doing it for 15 years, never asking for recognition, never seeking publicity. The only reason I know is because my nephew was one of those kids. Henry helped him graduate high school when everyone else had given up on him. My nephew is now in college studying engineering because this man believed in him." James turned directly to Margaret, who was now visibly trembling. "So when you told this man he couldn't sit next to you, when you said those seats were for people who actually matter, you need to understand something. This man matters more than most of us ever will. He's lived a life of service, sacrifice, and genuine dignity. He's earned respect not through money or status, but through character and action." The businessman who had first picked up the photograph stood up. "Sir," he said to Henry, his voice thick with emotion, "it would be my honor if you would take my seat. In fact, you should have the best seat on this bus." Another passenger stood. "Please, take mine." Then another, and another. Within seconds, nearly everyone on the bus was standing, offering Henry their seat, each person wanting to show respect to this humble man who had spent his life serving others. Henry looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Please," he said softly, "that's not necessary. I'm fine where I am." But James wasn't finished. He walked over to Margaret, who looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "Ma'am," he said firmly but not unkindly. "I think you owe this man an apology. A real one." Margaret's hands were shaking as she gathered the last of her shopping bags. Her face was red, tears forming in her eyes. For a moment, it seemed like she might refuse, might let her pride prevent her from doing the right thing. The entire bus watched, waiting. Finally, Margaret stood up. She walked slowly toward Henry, her designer heels clicking on the bus floor, each step seeming to cost her something. When she reached him, she stopped and for the first time really looked at him. She saw the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his weathered face, the dignity that no amount of money could buy. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I was cruel and judgmental and wrong. I don't know what else to say except that I'm deeply ashamed of how I treated you." Henry looked at her for a moment, then did something that surprised everyone. He smiled gently and extended his hand. "We all have moments we're not proud of," he said quietly. "What matters is what we do after. You're forgiven." Margaret took his hand, tears now streaming down her face. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "Not after what I said." "Forgiveness isn't about deserving it," Henry replied. "It's about choosing to let go of anger and giving people a chance to be better. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life too." The businessman stepped forward again. "Mr. Morrison, I work in media. If you'd allow it, I'd like to tell your story. The world needs to hear about people like you, about real heroes who don't seek the spotlight." Henry shook his head gently. "I appreciate the offer, but I didn't do any of those things for recognition. I did them because they needed to be done. There are thousands of people doing similar work every day, never seeking credit. They're the real heroes." Another passenger, an elderly woman, spoke up. "My husband was a veteran. He struggled for years after he came home. I wish someone like you had been there for him. Thank you for what you do." A young man near the back said, "I was homeless last year. A program like yours helped me get back on my feet. I didn't know you started it, but thank you so much." One by one, passengers began sharing their own stories. A teacher talked about the importance of volunteers in schools. A nurse discussed the veterans she'd treated who had nowhere to go. A single father mentioned how community programs had helped him when he lost his job. The bus had become a space of shared humanity, all because one man's quiet dignity had been revealed. James returned to his seat, wiping his eyes. "All right, folks," he said, his voice still emotional. "We need to get back on the road. But I want to say one more thing. We live in a world where we're constantly judging people by what we can see on the surface. Their clothes, their car, their job, their appearance. But today we've all been reminded that a person's worth has nothing to do with any of that. It's about character, kindness, and how they treat others when no one is watching." He started the engine, and the bus pulled back onto the road. But everything had changed. Margaret sat quietly in her seat, her shopping bags now seeming trivial and meaningless. She pulled out her phone, but instead of calling her friends to brag about her purchases, she began searching for volunteer opportunities in her area. Henry had returned to his seat, the young mother next to him now engaged in quiet conversation with him, listening intently as he told stories about the children he worked with. The teenager girls who had whispered earlier approached him shyly during the next stop. "Mr. Morrison," one of them said, "we're sorry for judging you earlier. We didn't know, but that's not an excuse. We should have been kinder regardless." "It's okay," Henry said warmly. "You're young, you're learning. The fact that you recognize it and apologize shows character. Keep that quality as you grow up." As the bus continued its journey, something remarkable happened. Passengers who had been strangers began talking to each other, sharing stories, connecting. The barriers of judgment and assumption had been broken down, replaced by genuine human connection. Margaret found herself in conversation with the elderly woman across the aisle, listening to stories about her husband's military service, learning about struggles she had never considered. When they reached the next stop, Margaret didn't get off. She had been planning to get off 3 stops ago, but something had changed in her. She stayed on the bus, riding to the end of the line, not wanting this experience to end, not wanting to return to her old life just yet. When the bus finally reached its final destination, Henry gathered his canvas bag and prepared to leave. But as he stood, every single remaining passenger stood with him. It was a spontaneous show of respect, a silent acknowledgement of his worth and their gratitude for the lesson he had taught them all. If you've ever misjudged someone or been misjudged yourself, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else learn this important lesson. James opened the bus doors and stepped out with Henry. Margaret followed, along with several other passengers. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I want to do more than just apologize. I want to make amends. I'd like to volunteer with your organization if you'll have me. I have resources, time, and I realize now that I've been wasting both on things that don't matter." Henry looked at her thoughtfully. "Are you sure? It's hard work, and it won't earn you any social status. The people we help can't give you anything in return except their gratitude." "That's exactly why I need to do it," Margaret replied. "I've spent years surrounding myself with things and people that make me feel important, but I've never actually done anything important. I want to change that. Please give me a chance." Henry smiled. "Everyone deserves a chance to become who they want to be. Come by our center tomorrow. We can always use dedicated volunteers." The businessman approached as well. "Mr. Morrison, I still want to help even if you don't want publicity. My company has a charitable foundation. We'd like to make a donation to your organization." Henry hesitated, then nodded. "If you want to help, I won't refuse. There are always more people who need assistance than we have resources to provide. Thank you." As the group dispersed, James walked Henry to the nearby cafe where he often stopped after his bus route. "So you know," James said, "I've been wanting to do that for months. Every time Margaret gets on my bus, she treats someone poorly. Today was just the worst of it. I'm glad the truth finally came out." "She's not a bad person," Henry said thoughtfully. "She's just been living in a bubble, surrounded by people who reinforced her worst qualities. Sometimes all it takes is one moment of truth to change someone's entire perspective. I hope she follows through." "Because of you, I think she will," James replied. "You have a way of bringing out the best in people." Henry chuckled. "I've had a lot of practice, and I've made plenty of mistakes along the way. The key is to keep trying, keep showing up, keep believing that people can be better." They sat in the cafe, two old friends connected by a life-saving moment decades ago, still connected by mutual respect and shared values. James asked about Henry's latest projects, and Henry talked enthusiastically about a new program helping veterans with PTSD find therapy animals. Meanwhile, Margaret sat in her expensive apartment, looking around at her possessions with new eyes. The designer clothes, the luxury furniture, the status symbols she had accumulated all seemed hollow now. She thought about Henry's worn jacket, his simple canvas bag, his modest demeanor, and realized he possessed something she had been missing her entire life: genuine purpose and peace. She opened her laptop and began researching Henry's organization. She read testimonials from veterans he had helped, saw pictures of families who had been housed through his efforts, watched a video of him reading to children at the hospital. Each piece of information reinforced what she had learned on the bus, that true worth comes from what you give, not what you take. The next morning, Margaret showed up at the community center, where Henry's organization operated. She wore jeans and a simple shirt, her designer clothes left at home. She was nervous, unsure if she would be welcomed after her behavior the previous day. But when Henry saw her, he greeted her with the same kind smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "Most people say they want to help, but few follow through." "I'm here," Margaret said firmly, "and I'm ready to work. I need to learn how to be a better person, and I think this is where I start." Henry introduced her to the team, a diverse group of volunteers from all walks of life. There were retired teachers, former corporate executives, college students, and formerly homeless individuals who now dedicated their time to helping others avoid the same fate. Margaret spent the day sorting donations, helping prepare meals, and listening to the stories of the people they served. One veteran, a man about her age, told her about losing everything after his service, about the PTSD that made it impossible to hold a job, about the program that had given him a second chance. "People like Henry," the veteran said, "they don't just give you a place to stay. They give you back your dignity. They remind you that you matter, that your service meant something, that you're not forgotten." Those words hit Margaret deeply. She thought about how she had told Henry he didn't matter, how she had dismissed him as unimportant. The shame washed over her again, but this time, instead of drowning in it, she channeled it into determination to do better. Over the following weeks, Margaret became a regular volunteer. She used her business connections to secure donations, her organizational skills to improve efficiency, and her newfound empathy to connect with the people they served. She was surprised to discover that the work filled a void in her life she hadn't even known existed. One evening, about a month after the bus incident, Margaret stayed late to help Henry close up the center. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they locked the doors. "How do you do it? How do you face all this need, all this suffering, and not become overwhelmed?" Henry was quiet for a moment, then replied, "You can't help everyone, and you can't fix everything, but you can help someone, and you can fix something. That's enough. If everyone did just that, the world would be transformed." "Do you ever get angry?" Margaret asked. "At the systems that fail these people? At the society that forgets them?" "Sometimes," Henry admitted. "But anger without action is just noise. I decided a long time ago that I'd rather spend my energy making things better than complaining about how bad they are." They walked together to the bus stop, the same route where their story had begun. As they waited, Margaret said, "I never thanked you properly for forgiving me. I was cruel to you, and you responded with grace. I don't think I would have done the same in your position." "You might surprise yourself," Henry said. "Growth isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them and choosing to be better. You've done that." The bus arrived, driven by James, who grinned when he saw them together. "Well, this is a sight I didn't expect to see," he said warmly. They boarded, and this time Margaret insisted Henry take the best seat. As they rode through the city, they talked about plans for expanding the program, about new initiatives they wanted to start, about the lives they hoped to change. Margaret realized that a month ago she would have been on her phone bragging to friends about purchases and parties. Now she was planning fundraisers and volunteer recruitment drives. Her old friends had stopped calling, unable to relate to her new priorities, but she had gained something far more valuable: purpose. When they reached Margaret's stop, she stood to leave, then turned back to Henry. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "Thank you," Henry replied, "for proving that people can change, that hearts can open, that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be." As Margaret walked home, she felt lighter than she had in years. The expensive apartment she returned to was the same, but she was different, and that difference would continue to ripple outward, touching lives she hadn't even met yet, all because one quiet old man had taught her the most important lesson of her life, that dignity, respect, and worth have nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with character and kindness. In a world that constantly judges based on appearances and material success, Henry Morrison quietly reminded everyone on that bus what truly matters. His story teaches us that real heroism isn't loud or flashy. It doesn't demand recognition or praise. It shows up every day, in small acts of service, in choosing kindness over cruelty, in helping others without expecting anything in return. Margaret learned that transformation is possible when we're willing to confront our prejudices and choose growth over comfort. The lesson from that rainy afternoon extends far beyond one bus route. It challenges each of us to look deeper, to recognize the inherent worth in every person we meet, and to remember that the quiet dignity of someone who has lived a life of service speaks louder than any designer label ever could. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the end. If it touched your heart, moved you to think differently, or reminded you of the power of respect and human dignity, I invite you to take one small action today. Show unexpected kindness to someone others might overlook, because you never know whose life you might change or how that person might change yours. There's another story waiting for you that explores this same theme of unexpected worth and hidden dignity. Click on the video beside this one. You might just find another perspective that resonates with your soul.